guys, Marian here and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to share all about the Jewish commandments, the mitzvot that we find in the Torah and the Talmud and from our rabbis, because the Jewish holiday of Shavuot is coming up, and on Shavuot we commemorate receiving the 10 commandments on Mount Sinai, and it's sort of this culmination from our journey as slaves in Egypt, becoming a free people, and then receiving the laws of Moses, of Torah, of God. And yet, as hugely important as this is, there's a lot of misunderstanding about these commandments. So let's jump in. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Marian. I make videos about being a mom and being a Jewish mom, and I'd love to have one of you. I'd love to have all of you as one of my subscribers, so hit that red subscribe button down below so you don't miss my videos. So as important as the 10 commandments are, which of course we cannot understate the importance of them, in Judaism we believe that there are actually 613 commandments, and there's a lot of numerical and number things in Jewish tradition and custom and superstition, and 613 is one of those really holy numbers, and it's because of this idea that there are 613 commandments, and they're divided into positives and negative, things that you must do and things that you must not do. And what's interesting is that the Talmud tells us that there are 613 commandments in the Torah, but in the Torah things are not spelled out exactly this way. So it doesn't say after the first 10, here's commandment 11 and 12. What the rabbis have done is gone back to the Torah and picked out from that the positive and negative commandments and compiled them into the list. So because this was done after the Holy Torah was given to us, there's a bit of debate about what the 613 are, but generally Jews go by Maimonides' list, and he compiled all of them in the Mishnah Torah. So of these commandments, I thought I would just read you a few because they're really interesting and they really shed light on a lot of Jewish law and where the Jewish religion bases so much of what we do from. I also want to add, before jumping in and sharing with you some of these commandments, that there's a lot based around things that we can no longer do. For example, we used to have the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. So if you visited Jerusalem today and you see the Western Wall, that is one of the outermost walls from our ancient temple. And I just love when history when you can physically see the history of the Jewish people that dates back so many thousands of years. So you can go to Israel and see this outer wall, but this was the outer wall of an enormous temple complex, and this is where the Holy Temple was. So there was a ton of laws and rituals, mitzvot, commandments that all centered around Torah life, that all centered around temple life, which we can no longer do. There's also ones that include things like animal sacrifice, paying tithes to the priesthood class that no longer exists. So as much as these commandments teach us how to live our life today, they're also a way of seeing our history and past in a beautiful and spiritual way, which no other history book can do. So in Judaism, we've also had to address this question of what do we do with these commandments that we can no longer observe. And what the rabbis tell us is if it's impossible to complete a commandment, to observe a commandment, then we are excused from it. And I will come back to that a little bit later because that is a very interesting Jewish way of looking at things in modern times and how we sort of deal with things that come up that touch on Jewish law. Things like, for example, I talk a lot about Judaism and pregnancy. I wrote my book, where is it? Expecting Jewish, all about this topic. And when it comes to fertility, there's a ton of modern science, right, that becomes involved. So this concept of making sure that Jewish law is always able to help us in our modern lives plays into that with things like, egg and sperm donation and IVF and all of that. But we're getting way off topic. Let me jump back into what are the 613 commandments. And in case I didn't make it clear, when you hear someone say a term like do a mitzvah or mitzvah, mitzvah actually means commandment. It doesn't mean good deed, although there are many good deeds that are commandments, but there's this intrinsic idea that we are actually commanded to do these things. Although we have a choice, God says in the Torah that you can follow the commandments or you cannot, but if you do not, you will be punished. And then the quote in the Torah is, therefore choose life. That choosing to obey the commandments is a way of choosing life. So although we have freedom of choice, we are still commanded to do these things. So aside from the 10 commandments that I'm sure you know, here are some of the 613. Okay. So there's a whole section about God, like we start off with in the 10 Commandments, to know there is a God, to know that he is only one God, to love him, to fear him, to sanctify his name, to not profane his name, to not destroy objects associated with his name. So this is an interesting one. So if you have a prayer book, let's say that's old, you can't just throw it away. You have to bury it, and there's like a ceremony and ritual for that. Same with a prayer book that falls on the floor. Anything that has God's name on it, you can't just treat like any other object. We have to love other Jews, to love converts, to not hate fellow Jews, to not embarrass others, to not oppress the weak, to not gossip about others. So as you can see, this is very much a code of conduct and morality of how to live our lives. Do not bow down to idols. Do not make an idol of yourself. Do not make an idol for others. Do not make human forms even for decorative purpose. Do not turn a city to idolatry. Do not burn a city that is turned to idol worship. Do not rebuild it as a city. So there are 613 of these. They're fascinating, and in honor of the holiday of Shavuot, I really invite you to take a look at them. I'll post a link down below where you can find them. And one thing I want to get back to is this idea that although these laws are codified, or there's this original written Torah, then there's our oral Torah, which has been passed down for generations and eventually was written down and codified. There still is so much room within Judaism to breathe and to expand. So for example, almost all rabbis have agreed that doing some things from medical science to help couples have children is perfectly allowed and kosher. There are some who don't, like there's some factions who don't, but in general, they've said that it's okay. So this is a really good example of how rabbis will take the original laws as they're written and decide on the meaning of them, on how they apply to modern times today. So anytime there's a hotly debated thing within Judaism or within religion in general, and I won't list them out, but you know them all, this is a way for us to look at the original text and look at what rabbis have said, and to make sure that we're honoring the spirit of the law and make sure we're continuing to hold our values, which is loving others, treating others equally, respectfully, and though we were all made in the image of God, which is what the Torah tells us, and making sure we uphold those values even as with modern times they change. So I hope you guys learned a little something for the holiday of Shavuot and you liked this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up to let me know. Hit that red subscribe button down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!